This week's video is sponsored by Squarespace. Well, good evening everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Finally, autumn is here and I've come to the right place for autumn colour. I've come down to Kananaskis, which is it's south of Banff National Park in Alberta. And we've come just at the right time, mid-September, beautiful fall colour. I'm here with my partner Karen, and we're here for a couple of days, and then hopefully I'm meeting up with Gavin. I'm photographing right next to the road here. Got here a little bit late, a lot of driving, picking up passes and stuff. So the sun has more or less gone behind the mountains here. I was hoping to get some backlit foliage, but I've just decided to stick with foliage that's kind of in the shade. And it's still working pretty good. The colors are nice and vibrant. So what I'm photographing here, the red foliage here is dogwood. And then we have quite a few poplars in the area. There's aspen and there's also cottonwoods, I believe, in this area. It's a little hard to photograph because you'll get some areas where there might be a really good patch of aspen trees and then there'll be another area where they're kind of messy. But what I'm doing here is I've decided to go with some panos. So I took a pano to start off with, actually standing right on the road. And now I've got in a little bit closer to this fall foliage in here. And I think it might work. I'm doing a really long pano. So I'm just including the bases of these aspen trees and then the vibrant red color, or in this case, it's kind of a pinky color. I'll show you what I have, and then you guys can scrutinize the photograph. But I think it's going to work. So in this case, what I'm more or less going for is just color, and you see we have this vibrant pink color in the bottom there. It would have been nice if the trees or the boles of these trees were a little bit more evenly spaced out. You'll notice that there aren't that many trees over here, and there's a bit of a gap in here. Ideally, for my uses, I would have preferred it if all of these trees were kind of spaced out quite evenly. But I think this might work out. The one thing that I am trying to do is make sure that as many trees as possible are separated from one another, and it's a little bit hard. And what I mean by that is so they're not overlapping with one another, so that they kind of merge together, because it just ends up being confusing, especially when there's no light, when it's flat like this. But I don't know, we'll see. I think it'll work. Probably have to add a little bit of contrast to this, since there isn't any light. It's too bad I didn't get a bit earlier, because there would have been some nice backlighting on this foliage here, and it would have just given it a bit more three-dimensionality. But anyway, it's a start. I'm struggling a bit this morning, I must admit. It's absolutely beautiful. But do you think I can find a composition? I think the problem is that it's quite busy I mean, the color is spectacular, but it's trying to put the color with something. And there's some really great grasses in here and fallen leaves, and there's wild strawberries that have kind of gone red. And what I do like about this area is the grasses in between these shrubs. They're quite frosted, so it has a nice contrast between the colors, but I'm not really high enough to get the shrubs individually. I could get the drone out, but drones aren't allowed in parks, so that's kind of out of the question. I did spot these aspen here, and there's one that's sticking out a little bit further than the rest, so it's a little bit brighter. So I think I'm going to just start with this, and hopefully that'll get the creativity going, and then I can move on to something else. I think this might work, but it doesn't have the frosted grasses that I really like. Now, I think there's a really good chance that I might end up taking a pano. I don't know why I always end up taking panos with this camera, but I just like taking panos, I guess. So as far as composition goes, what I usually look for in forest photography or woodland photography is a shape or a tree that stands out to me above the rest. Now, it can be very slight. It doesn't have to be a drastic change in a pattern or whatever. In this case, all it is really is this one tree kind of in the central portion here is out a little bit further than the rest of the trees, and to my eye it looks slightly brighter and slightly wider. So that's kind of the central subject of my composition, and then I compose around that tree. Now, whether it'll work or not, I don't know. The one thing I have noticed though is that to the right of that tree there's another tree that stands out about the same distance and has about the same brightness. And if I include that tree as well, then I find that those two trees are competing with one another. So it looks off balance to me. So I've carefully composed it so that I'm just including the one central tree and not the tree on the right. The other thing that I'm trying to be conscious of is while that is my central subject, or that's what I'm basing my composition around, I really want it to be separate from all the rest. So I'm making sure that there's no trees behind it that are converging with it. The other trees, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, there's so many of them that you're going to get convergence with different trees anyway. The one redeeming factor about it is that the trees that are in the foreground here are slightly brighter than the ones in the background. Because we're in a field here, there's more light getting to the trees in the front, if that makes sense. It would be really nice if there was a little bit of light on these. When the sun does come up over the mountain here, they will be backlit, but I suspect that by the time that happens, the light will be too harsh, so it probably won't work, unless a few clouds come in and just subdue the light just a little bit. after searching around for I don't know how long, I think I might have found the composition. It's bizarre, it's just absolutely stunning. But do you think I can find a composition? It's a little busy, and like I said before, if you're down at the height we're at now, the shrubs kind of blend in with one another, so it's hard to define the shrubs and the trees and such. Also, if you hear a lot of noise in the background, there's a ton of traffic coming by down here. I'm not really sure, excuse me, where everybody's going. Maybe it's because it's Friday and everybody's coming in from Calgary. I know this is a popular place for people to come camping and hiking and such. But no photographers here, I can't believe it. Like I said though, I think I found a composition. I really love these golden grasses. And when I first got here, there was quite a bit of frost on the grasses, but most of it is gone now. The clouds have moved in a little bit, which is nice because it's subdued the light, but it's really bright. And there is a bit of directional light coming from the top of the mountain there. But what I've decided to do is I've decided to include everything. I have these beautiful shrubs that are slightly backlit, the golden grasses, and then the aspen in the background. The fall color this year isn't as good as last year. The foliage on the ground here is spectacular, but the trees look very subdued, and I suspect it's from the heat that we had over the summer and the lack of rain. But nonetheless, it still looks brilliant. I'm going to start off with a pano, 65 by 24, try and include everything, and then slowly narrow my view into something a little bit more defined. This is a lovely scene. So the clouds are kind of dissipating, which is a bit of a shame, but there's still, or the light is still subdued enough that we're getting some nice backlighting on some of these fall leaves here in the foreground, and of course the grasses as well. So the contrast is getting a little bit high, but it's still manageable, especially with the medium format camera. And that's why, this is one of the reasons why I got a GFX 100, was to deal with these scenes with a lot of contrast. There's just more dynamic range in the files. So right now I'm doing a pano, or a 16 by 9 of all of these trees, and what I've tried to do is just make sure that I've got them all well separated so they're not merging with one another. And then of course we have the aspen in the background that you should be able to see, but they're in shadows, so they're not so bright that they're going to be distracting for the trees in the foreground here. And there's a little bit of backlighting, just touching the tops of those trees in the background. I'm having to use my hand. I'm getting a bit of lens flare in here. And I've also put on a case polarizer just to get rid of some of the glare on the foliage, the shrubs especially, just to saturate the colors a little bit more. Once again, I'd like to thank Squarespace for supporting my channel and sponsoring this week's video. One of my favorite features of a Squarespace website is the ability to quickly and efficiently update a gallery or page either from a desktop computer or while on the fly using the Squarespace app from my mobile device. Loading multiple images onto a page is quick and offers the ability to change a design or page quickly and elegantly without any coding knowledge. Want to sell your products? No problem. Setting up shop is also quick and intuitive. Sound interesting? Why not head over to squarespace.com and try it for free? And if you like what you find, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase. Good morning, everybody. So I've come back to the location that I was at yesterday morning. It seems to be the best spot around, other than perhaps hiking into the mountains. It's almost like rush hour on a Monday. I just can't believe it. All of these people, I couldn't figure out where they're going. They're all coming from Calgary and they're heading up to the trailheads up in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park. And I went up there with Karen yesterday just to see what it was like. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful up there. But the cars, it's just unbelievable. There was hundreds of cars at the trailheads, which is a little bit of a put off, but it's understandable. I mean, people want somewhere to go and not many people are traveling right now. So this is probably the best place to come. I mean, there aren't any travel restrictions. It's just a pain to travel for some people, especially if you haven't been vaccinated, I guess. So anyway, I've come back to the place that I was rudely interrupted by yesterday by the light. Just suddenly got too harsh and I was just starting to get into it. So I'm hoping that we might get a little bit of backlight again. You can see behind me here, there aren't any clouds whatsoever, but to the east, it's quite cloudy. So when the sun does come up, it'll probably take a while for the clouds to burn off, and then I'm sure it'll be quite sunny for the rest of the day. Right, I'm just going to head over to where I was yesterday and see if I can find some more compositions. Okay, so I've come back to the spot that I was at yesterday. I felt a little bit rushed at the end there with the light. It changed so quickly and I managed to pull off a couple of shots, but I wanted to explore this composition a little bit more and perhaps find some other comps in the same area. As you can see, the light is quite subdued now because we still have the clouds in here. So what I've done here is I've tried to separate each of these trees individually, which is quite easy to do because they're quite well spaced, and then have the aspen in the background as a somewhat of a line in the background. They're kind of secondary to these trees in the foreground, and I absolutely love the grasses in the foreground, and then of course we have the autumn color in the midground there too. So all together they work really well. Now it is a little bit windier today, so I am having a problem with shutter speed because it's still quite dark as well. Yesterday I took an image just over here, which is only a few feet, but the trees looked a bit more well spaced, and for this composition, even though they're spaced away from one another, the composition is a little bit tighter, and I'm not really sure which one works the best. So I'll show you the composition that I have now, and then I'll show you the composition that I took yesterday, and we'll kind of have a bit of a comparison and some of perhaps the negatives and the positives of each of them, if there are any. So this is the composition that I have right now, and you can see that each of the trees, this one, this one, this one, and so on, I've composed it so that they're spaced from one another and they're not overlapping, except for some of the branches and such in here. And I quite like this fall color up in here. I've purposely cut off the bottoms of the trees here, except for this one and the back one. I don't think we need to include the bottoms of them, but I will take some compositions with the bottoms. Now then, if I move my camera over to where I was yesterday, which is right here, I believe, and we'll just adjust our camera here, you can see that the trees are still well separated, but they have a little bit more space in between them. I think I had something like that. Now, including the bases of them, and actually I think I did take a shot something like that yesterday. I quite like that configuration as well, and that actually might be my favorite, because we're including all of these aspen in the background. I love the line of aspen, and then we have the fall color. The aspen actually give context to the location, and then we have these beautiful grasses in the foreground here as well. And I might even be able to go wider. Now this is 16:9, and this is a format that I would probably use for this composition. So something like that. So it's a good idea to just play around with each. If you find something that you really like, a subject or a group of trees in this case, it's not a bad idea to try lots of different compositions rather than just settling on one and then just moving on to something else. And I often do this. I'll find something that I really like, and I'll just stay with it until I find a composition that I think works the best. And of course, when the light is fleeting, if you have a bit of an idea of what it is you want, like I think in this case, this is probably my favorite composition out of all of them, I would probably just stick with this and just take a number of different images of this comp. Okay, so we are getting a little bit of directional light now, so that's really elevating some of those leaves and bringing them forward. The biggest issue we have right now though is wind. It's quite windy out, so I've had to jack up my ISO to 800. I guess what I could do if I wanted to is I could probably use a shallower depth of field and just stack the images, like maybe do 3 or 4 different images at, say, I don't know, f5.6 or f8, and then combine them later on in Photoshop. But I'd rather just do it all in one shot. So I'm shooting at f16, ISO 800, and even with that, my shutter speed is still pretty slow. It's 1/25th of a second, which I don't think is fast enough to capture the movement of these leaves. So I might have to focus stack if I want everything sharp, that is. Sometimes a bit of movement doesn't bother me that much. It's not the end of the world. Okay, got one more composition that I'm going to attempt in this little area here before I go back to the van and have a nice cup of tea. Now this is quite a bit more complicated, and it might not work because this might be too much going on in it. But I use the same principles as all of my other forest photography compositions, in that I try to keep those trees separated from one another so they're not merging. And even though this is a really complicated scene, I think I've managed to, for the most part, separate most of these trees. The light right now is really quite beautiful. It's subdued, but there is sun trying to come through. So what I've done here is, this is more about trying to keep those trees separated from one another. And you can see that we have this tree here, these two, it'd be pretty hard to separate. Now this one is a bit problematic, this one in here. See how it's touching this one here? And then we have these are pretty much separated. There's a bit of a clump here, separated. So it's working pretty good. Now if I move the camera over just a little bit to there, you can see that these are separated now, but this is even more of a clump. So there are going to be compromises. And of course, trees like this one, you can either include it all or try to move your camera over so that you're hiding it behind another one. But then of course you might create some other issues at the same time. So those are the things that I really look for when I'm taking images of forests, because as I've said a number of times, you're trying to make something that's just one-dimensional look three-dimensional. And the only way you can do that is with light. And if the light isn't working in your favor, then you really have to define what the subject is and try and separate it from other objects, so there's not this big confusion about, well, what is it that you're looking at? Now that's not to say that every composition has to be like that, but that's more or less what I look for. It's trying to find some kind of order out of what is otherwise chaos. Right everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some information out of it that might be helpful to you. I do tend to repeat myself over and over again. Photography is one of those things that there is only so much you can talk about when it comes to composition and camera gear and the workings of a camera. The best advice I can give anybody to improve your photography is just to get out there and start making images. Learn from other people, learn from your mistakes, learn from your successes, and that's the only way you're really going to improve. All right, everybody, thanks ever so much for watching again this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to give me the old thumbs up. And as always, if you enjoy the content of this channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. All right, bye for now.